Greetings of the day, learners. I am Dr. Shamini Mandal and I am back with the second lecture of my 11th module. So, my second lecture I will be dealing with archiving folklore, and you know already my 11th module, which is the preserving and the techniques of folklore. So, now I will be talking about how we can archive, and preserve, most importantly, how we can archive the folklore and the folk culture we have. Coming to the definition of an archive, there is no single actually, definite definition of archives. However, there are few examples of archival definition. According to the 1917 French definition of archives, records become archival as soon as they are created or received. American federal records become archival as soon as they are formally offered. Although archives are records, but not all records are archived. Please do remember that archives are record, but not all records are archives. The records are selected for an archive because they have permanent value, either as evidence of transactions or because of the information they contain about people, places and things. The decision of selecting records for archives is taken by the archivist. The term archives has derived from the Greek word archaion. Etymologically, archaion has its origin in the word arch, which refers to the magisterial residence, then the public office where government records are kept. Historical manuscripts, isolated letters of ancient rulers, copper plates, stone inscriptions, besides a host of other artifacts are popularly known as archives. Archives are a greater or a lesser fraction of records of an organization, institution or individual, which are preserved for their enduring value, whether they are current or non-current. One of the most important Italian archivist, Eugenio Casanova, says, that the orderly accumulation of documents were created in the course of its activity by an institution or an individual, and when it is preserved for the accomplishment of political, legal or cultural purpose is what we can say an archive. Dr. P. Basu, an Indian archivist, said that archives are used for, records, and it is clear that archives are essentially all records, but most importantly, all records are not archives. So, you should remember that if you want to search, any record or you can say any document in the archive, it will not be available in a plain and simple word if I put it. But the things which are important to us, the things which will be evidence to any historical timeline, and it provides us the context of our history and the background, they are kept in the archives. Be it anything we can say, be it a textual evidence, be it material evidence or any evidence which is of use is something we get in the archives. Now, coming to what an archivist is. An archivist is a person who is responsible for managing the records of archives. They maintain the archives of the parent identity or an entity, be a government, organization, institution, primarily for their administrative usefulness to the creator or successors. In some archives, the archivists serve as record managers, assisting the creators of records in archiving budget and efficiency in the creation, maintenance, use and disposition. Archivists have an important role by preserving and making records available in the society, especially those who are involved in various research oriented activities, disseminating information and new idea. Now, coming to what are the characteristics of the archives. The relationship that archives bear is, of the creating organization. The archives of a particular institution or organization reflect the policies, functions and transaction of that institution alone and nothing else. The distinctive features of the archives is their official character, being the products or byproducts of transaction of certain organization or institution having legal efforts. From this, it's also that the custody of the creator or the legitimate successor for the validity in the court of law is there. The archives are unique. Each record was created in single copy for a specific purpose. The authenticity of archives refers to the underlying fact that the archives are not collected, but in the usual sense of the term, by the creating institution or organization, they rather grow naturally out of their activities and operation. The difference between archives and other record keeping organization or institution is that the latter do not have the above mentioned characteristics. Whereas it is essential for archives to create relationship between the organization and the sense of creating archives. Archival records are preserved for either use by the individuals or research scholars, or as I am saying, the organization. The proper utilization of records hence involves several factors such as concentration of records in one place or the establishment of a records office, proper arrangement of records and preparation of their reference media. Opinion as to how records are to be concentrated at one place and how they should be arranged and how they should be made available for use both by the creating institute as well as by research scholar needs to be understood. However, these rules differ from time to time and country to country. Now, I come to the functions of the archives. For an efficient evolution and to ensure that the records are understood within their most appropriate context, there are certain level of process for archival materials. Remember, archives collect non-current records of an organization or an institution or of a research scholar or individual, and the types of materials collected varies from government records, folklore materials, history of people, manuscripts as per the archival requirement. Acquisition is thus very pivotal. So, we have four kind, you can say, process. The one is acquisition, another one is preservation, another one is documentation, and there are a few more, which shows us how we can actually have an archive for ourselves. Also, there are copyright issues when we talk about an archive, which I will be also discussing in this lecture. So, an archive is you can say easy for us to search certain documents, but maintaining an archive or copyrighting an archive or any document is equally a task, and it is very necessary part of archive. For example, the policies of institutional archives usually attempt to ensure adequate and complete documentation of the institution. It falls in the acquisition policy. And remember, its functions and its activities are also within their grasp. Therefore, the policy identifies priority subjects for acquisition and the types of materials most likely to provide important information about the institution. Talking about preservation, which is one of the major processes of archiving, the process of preservation takes place after a systematic, well documented collection that has been made with content. The goal of preservation is to assure that records in archival custody survive for an indefinite period of time, in some cases as long as legally necessary. This can be most easily achieved when the goals and basic principles of preservation are understood by all staff involved with the records. Remember, it is a joint responsibility of a number of professional staff for preservation of archives, each of whom brings unique knowledge to bear on the complex problem of preserving archival records. Archival materials are diverse. They are composite objects, generally composed of a variety of papers, inks from carboning to laser printing, animal skins and its products, textiles, photographs and photographic material, audiovisual material, you can say wax cylinders, CDs, DVDs, magnetic material. And each of these materials most often respond somewhat differently to changing environmental condition, hence they may vary in their preservation process. You should remember, as I mentioned a few of the things which are archived. Okay. So, the preservation which I will be discussing in one of my lectures, the preservation is also a very difficult process, because the preservation technique for a leather object might not be the same of the preservation technique of, you can say, an ink material, or a papyrus scroll, for example, or a CD or a vinyl printing. All their preservations are different, because their material is different, and we do not know how they will respond to the same temperature. So, for preservation, there are different temperatures, there are different you can say processes of how the archives are preserved. Also, there are appraisal. The decision by an archive or organization is to take collection to preserve and process its own archival records. It involves a significant commitment of time, money and space, because no one can afford to keep everything and anything. That is why the incoming material being considered must be appraised to determine, firstly, whether the collection as a whole is worth keeping, and second, which item within it are permanently valuable. The preference of decision or preserving collection depends upon the current historical and cultural values and the intellectual and conceptual frameworks of those conducting the appraisal. We have the documentation, which is an essential bridge between the collectors and the archives. It is a written document which accompanies with the acquired materials. For a systematic documentation, every piece of note has great value, as the context is not self-evident. The documentation process includes the identification of item, storage location, retrieval, presentation and circulation for the information of the users. For example, the knowledge of being responsible for the preservation of the recordings might not be known always. Therefore, all details of the recording, including the answers to the basic questions why, what, where, should be documented as an archival holding. Using archives or archival collection exists to be used, but the understanding of appropriate use varies from institution to institution. Usually, all archives provide information of their collection in published forms like newsletter, ephemera or brochures. And nowadays, in many countries, information are provided through internet. However, the archivist is much responsible to their user because of the uniqueness of their holdings. Therefore, archivists require to guide the user to care for and handle the archival records, especially for paper records are concerned, because they are very old, being prone to perishing if handled recklessly. Every user to leave the records after consultations, we should keep it in the same condition in which they were got used. So, while handling any archival element or item, we have to be every time very conscious, because as I said, only the important items which gives us you can say a look into the history or a look into the earlier context is kept in the archives, and they are not replaceable, they are irreplaceable actually, and they are permanently valuable. So, while handling an archive, anyone, be it the institution or be it the research scholar or an individual, should be super, you can say, careful of how they are handling it, because most of the time they are very brittle, we can say, they are fragile, we can say, and maybe some touch kind of destroys them completely. Now, I will be talking about the archives and how they are divided into categories. And so, we have archives which have we have categories, namely academic archives like archives in the colleges, universities or other academic institutions. Government archives include institutions run on a local and state level, as well as those by national government. So, in India, we have the National Archives of India, okay, and we also have the state government archives, which collect, preserve and organize government records and other materials of historical importance. We have the National Archives of India, which is our apex archival institution and is generally expected to provide technical know-how and requisite training to the professional of state and other archival institutions. within the growth of concept of preservation of cultural heritage of the country as well as that of the various regions, the archives are expected to inculcate the awareness about preservation of cultural heritage among public at large. National Archives of India as well as various state archives mount exhibitions and organize lectures and celebrate Archives Week for the fulfillment of this objective. Through the main clienteles of the archives, the decision makers of the central and the state government, but in recent years the main thrust is shifting towards the various ministries of the government. And also, the National Archive is running various training programs ranging from short duration, and also they are teaching the younger generation how to preserve the archives. Okay, they kind of giving, as I said, degrees and diplomas of how to handle the archives. Remember, heritage and history forms a very important part of our archives, and people with knowledge of history and the cultural heritage we have play a very important role, and you can say they understand our archives better. Also, there are many private institutions who are holding the archival research. They are giving way to archival research, and also they are making the public more, you can say, aware of how an archive should be treated and what should be a part of the archive. For example, the National Archives of India has an established library which provides secondary sources of information and requirements of creators of the records of the Government of India, legislators, judiciary, decision makers, India Office List, India Army List, Civil List, new media, technological collection, application of computers, electronic books and journals as a useful adjunct to the Government of India, and they are all available in the National Archives of India. Now, I will come to the National Film Archive of India, of which I have attached a photo here. It was established in February 1964 as a media unit of the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. Its objective is to acquire, preserve and restore the rich heritage of national cinema and the cream of international cinema. The archive has made significant progress in the preservation of films, audio and video material, documentation, research and dissemination of film culture in India. The archive functions as the main repository of Indian and foreign research workers for viewing film classics relating to their projects. The archive's distribution library caters to over 300 film societies and film study groups in educational institutions. NFAI, or the National Film Archives of India, is a member of the International Federation of Film Archives since May 1969, which enables it to receive expert advice and material on preservation techniques, documentation, bibliographies and to exchange rare films with such other archive under the Archival Exchange Program. The archive maintains a distribution library of 16 films, Indian and foreign, which are loaned to film societies and others for non-commercial study screenings. NFAI, in collaboration with FTII, conducts an annual film appreciation course, and everyone kind of attends it. Also, you should remember that the film festivals we have, be it in Delhi we have the Mami festival, we have the Kolkata we have a film festival. All of them are equally important in encouraging, or you can say in teaching the mass about the importance of films and how that the reels, you can say the 16 reels and the others have been preserved to give the audience a better idea of how cinema evolved in India. So, the NFAI plays a very important role in understanding how cinema evolved, as I said, in India, from the silent talkies to, you can say, the recent ones, and also how international cinema gained momentum and even the evolution of international cinema. It helped both in great ways. Now, coming to the Archives and Research for Ethnomusicology, the ARCE was established in 1982 by the American Institute of Indian Studies at Gurgaon, Haryana, and is a consortium of American universities. The primary objective of this archive was to provide a center in India where collections of Indian music and oral traditions could be centralized and made available. The preservation of these recordings, cataloging them, making them available to researchers from the basis of the day-to-day activities of the archives. Presently, ARC holds a numerous, voluntarily deposited recordings, both audio and video. The field collections are supplemented by a large and comprehensive collection of commercially published recordings, phonodiscs, cassettes and compact discs, also from past of the archives. These range from classical music to popular music, including film music and other regional genres from all over India. A recent but growing section on world music is also a part of this collection. The ARC library houses books as well as journals on ethnomusicology, performing arts including dance and theatre, folklore, anthropology in India, linguistics, research methodology. The focus is on the study of ethnomusicology in India, though theoretically important works on all cultures of the world are included. Newspaper cuttings from major national and regional dailies also form a part of the valuable research material available at the archives. ARC also organizes seminars and workshops on ethnomusicology as well as archiving. At a smaller scale, discussion group meetings are organized to provide a forum for informal discussions on ethnomusicology and related areas. Now, coming to the copyright issues of the archives, when materials are acquired or donated to an archive, certain complicated ethical issues always accompany it. The term ethics actually defines a system of moral principles and the rules of conduct recognized in respect to a particular group, culture, class of human action. Moral principles as of an individual or that branch of philosophy dealing with values to the right or wrong of certain actions and the goodness and bad deeds of the motives. Remember, the governing principle in creating a code of ethics is that the rule must not be arbitrary. They must be necessary for an aid to the purpose of the field in which they apply. For example, in a field recording archives, the recorded materials of a particular community are rare. Archives have to be aware of the rights of the community to their music. While signing for any kind of commercial releases, archives should make communication with both the community and the depositor or the collector, which can be consulted as to the uses of the recordings. Remember, as I said you, copyright is a very big issue in archival research and archival preservation, we can say, because unless and until you have the copyright of the documentation or document, or the things which are going to be archived, it cannot be taken in the archive, because only if the organization and, as I have said, the depositor or the collector kind of have that agreement, then only it is kept in the archives. So, remember, copyright issues are very important in the process of building an archive and maintaining an archive. Copyright regulation has an important role to play, these may vary from country to country. Whatever may be the difference of regulation, but it is very important that when copying sound documents, one must clarify the copyright situation regarding any particular document to the source, especially when a copy is being made for public performance. In research archives, where usually collections are donated, the archives assume full legal ownership. But there are terms and conditions between donor and archives. For example, the donor's access to and use of the collection, the restriction on access of other to certain materials in a collection, usually for a specific period of time. Also, the ownership of the records, including copyright, remains with the creator of the records unless those rights are explicitly given over to the archival repository. For example, a folklore collection, the intellectual rights might be held by the informant or the folklorist or the organization. The idea of all archival effort is to preserve valuable records and making them available for user, for making records available for user. Also, how the archives are done by preparing manual for access policies, providing archival materials to scholar, if necessary charging fees, and also restrictions on access and use, providing security and physical protection of archival holding, and advertising archival holding and services. Remember, the technology provision of a sound archive, I will give you the example of a sound archive, is a tool for getting the sound recording done for the archive and also making dubbing for the incoming collection. The requirement of recording technology of a sound archive largely depends on technical and physical functions of its day-to-day. The selection of recording equipment such as microphones, recorder, playback machine and recording media such as the cassettes, disc and reel that carry the sound must be of a standard which will level the recording. Both the recording and reproduction equipment must be regularly and professionally maintained. Archives also face constant problem in creating and media are maintaining adequate storage condition. The equipment, the tape, digital media are fragile and are especially affected by the dampness, light and heat. So, better the storage, better the longer life of the medium. Also, these materials must be protected from stray magnetic fields. Electric circuits and tapes and discs must be in chemically insert covers. Materials of which the recording media are made must be stable as possible. There are discs which must be stored vertically or suspended in vertical tiles. Special care are also taken for the archival thing. Now, coming to the end of my second lecture of the 11th module. As I do in my earlier lectures, I have tried to give you an idea of how an archiving works. And in my next lecture, I will be telling you, about some of the people who have contributed to the archives. And remember, archiving is also important in folklore. As archiving is important in every context, similarly, it is important in folklore too. Because the more elements you can say or the materials of folk culture or folklore we archive, the more knowledge we get about the evolution of folk culture and how folk culture has become an important part of our life. So, archiving is very necessary, be it the folk archiving or we can say archiving of different materials, not necessarily that it has to be always like of great importance, but the only important materials are kept in the archives. We can say that archives gives us a perspective into looking into history, be it the history of anything, be it the history of music, be it the history of performances, be it the history of films, be it the history of theatres. Archives actually are the documented area which helps us to understand the historical background and helps us to research about a certain area for a better understanding of our civilization. Thank you and see you in my next lectures.